Mancano 4 secondi al counter.
Io ho avviato la live, intendo.
Vai.
Qua sto ricaricando la pagina. Tanto, fammi vedere se è partita la live, che sennò qua veramente. Dal vivo. Sì, la live è partita. Bella a tutti ragazzuoli, siamo tornati. È caduto il telefono. Appo, controllami l'audio per favore.
Però devo vedere un attimo.
Perché non so neanche l'audio. Ciao a tutti ragazzi, noi siamo gli Event io sono Ivan ed eccoci oggi ragazzi ritornati in una nuova live. Tra l'altro saremo in live anche domani ragazzi, ricordatevi domani di venire in live perché ci sarà Doom Eternal, faremo la live di Doom Eternal. Nel frattempo becchiamoci la presentazione della PS5, se parte. Siamo sicuri che streamano? Su...
Sì, ma non è su PlayStation, cazzo, dove cazzo è, aspetta.
Come non è su PlayStation? Dov'è che streamano? YouTube?
No, sempre su Twitch, ma non so su che canale.
Sei sicuro?
Sì.
Fammi controllare che non sia su YouTube.
No, no, sì, su YouTube mi sa,
Madonna. Fortuna che ho detto, non è che streamano su YouTube. No, no, non streamano su YouTube. Infatti. Streamano su YouTube. Dio, madonna.
Del rotto PS5.
PlayStation. Eccoli qua, The Road to PlayStation. Conferenza. L'audio.
In future consoles. This requires weeks on the road as reaching the bulk of the game creators involves talking to well over 100 people at something like 24 publishers and developers. And it is incredibly valuable. By the way, the feature most requested by the developers, that was an SSD, which we were very happy to put in hardware, but a lot of problem solving was required. I'll be doing a deep
ciao
dive
Thomas,
on the
ciao
SSD and surrounding
bene, bene, a
systems
te
later
Thomas,
on
sto bene?
in this talk.
Ah, poi mi hai controllato
It's
l'audio se va
also
bene?
key to make a generational leap while keeping the console sufficiently familiar to game developers. I think about this in terms of balancing evolution and revolution. Now, with PlayStation 1, 2, and 3, the target was a revolution each time with a brand new feature set. That was great in many ways, but time for the developers to get up and running got longer with each console. In the past, I've called this time to triangle. Here's what I had for those three consoles. To be clear, I'm not talking about time to make a game. Developers will be ambitious, and it may take them 6 years or so to
cambiamento tra PlayStation 1, il 2 e il 3.
What I'm talking about is that dead time before graphics and other aspects of game development are up and running, and trying to minimize that. On the other hand, if we're trying to reduce that dead time to zero, that means the hardware architecture can't change at all. We're handcuffed. We need to judge for each feature what value it adds and whether it's worth the increase in developer time needed to support it. So with PlayStation 4, we were able to strike a pretty good balance between performance and familiarity. We got required
The road to PS5.
With PS5, the GPU was definitely the area we felt the most tension between adding new features and keeping a familiar programming model. Ultimately, I think we've ended up with something under a month. That feels like we're striking about the right balance.
Non c'è ancora il modello disegnato,
later today about our philosophy with the GPU and the specific feature set that resulted from it. It's also very important for us as the hardware team to find new dreams something other than CPU performance, GPU performance, and the amount of RAM.
Sono le quattro teste di cazzo davanti.
Over the past 2 decades has been astonishing, but there are other areas in which we can innovate.
Vabbè, Picci. Ciao, sono nuovo iscritto. Ah, no, non ti salutiamo, Picci.
SSD was very much on the direction to explore, regardless of what came out of the conversations with game developers and publishers. The biggest feature in this category is the custom engine for audio. That's today's final topic. The push for vastly improved audio, and in particular 3D audio, isn't something that came out of development meetings. It's much more the case that we had a dream of what might be possible 5 years ago, and then worked out a number of steps we could take to set us on that path. So here again are the three principles. The first being enabling the desires of developers to drive the hardware design. To me, the SSD really is the key to the next generation. It's a game changer. And it was the #1 ask from developers.
SSD.
As in, we know it's probably impossible, but can you put an SSD in it? That was a discussion we were also having internally. It was clear that the presence of a hard drive in every PlayStation 4 was having a positive impact. A lot of things that would simply have been impossible at Blu-ray disc speeds were now possible. At the same time, though, in 2015 and 2016, when we were having these conversations, developers were already banging up against the limits of the hard drive, and a lot of developer time was being spent designing around slow load speeds. I want to focus in on just one number here, which is how long it takes to load a gigabyte of data from a hard drive. The difficulty being that hard drives are neither particularly fast nor flexible. If all your data is in one block, which is frankly not very likely, you can load 50 to 100 megabytes a second, depending on where the data is located on the hard drive. Let's assume it's on the outer edge, which means loading a gigabyte takes 10 seconds. If you compress your game packages, you can fit more data on the Blu-ray disc and also effectively boost your hard drive read speed by the compression.
Troppo calmo il tipo.
We support
Parla troppo calmo.
PlayStation 4 that gets you something like 50% more data and 50% higher effective read speed. Unfortunately, though, it's highly likely that your data is scattered around in various files on the hard drive, as well as sourced from multiple locations within those files. So lots of seeks are needed at 2 to 50-ish milliseconds each.
Il video si chiama La strada PS5.
That the hard drive is spending 2/3 of its time seeking. And only
Per ora
a
hanno
third of
detto
its
solo
time
roba riguardo
actually
l'hard disk di Play 4 che
Putting
c'è
all
il
of that
SSD
together,
basta,
a
non è che
gigabyte is
nulla
very
che
roughly 20
su PC.
seconds to load from a hard drive.
Tipo
Now,
Xbox ha aperto
a
tutto col
gigabyte
trailer.
is not. Games are using 5 or 6 gigabytes of RAM on PlayStation 4, so boot times and load times can get pretty grim. Or to put that differently, as a player, you wait for the game to boot, wait for the game
Immagina
to
che lui
load,
adesso per parlare
wait for the
ti
level
prende dei
to
milioni.
reload every time you die, and you wait for what is euphemistically called fast travel. And all of that leads to the dream. What if we could have not just an SSD, but a blindingly fast SSD?
Vabbè!
5 gigabytes a second.
Istantaneo.
Da 50-100 megabyte a 5 G.
Vabbè!
As such. If you have a 5 gigabyte a second SSD,
LSSD.
you can read data from 1,000 different locations in that
Spero che sia un
pretty much
NVMe.
speed. As for
Minchia, da 50 a 100 megabyte a 5 giga.
So memory is bigger. Instead, we should be asking how long to load 2 gigabytes. And the answer is about a quarter of a second.
2
That's
gigabyte
amazing. We're talking 2 orders of magnitude, meaning very roughly 100
Prima 1 giga ogni 20 secondi, adesso 2
which
giga
means
in
at 5 gigabytes a
0,2.
second for the SSD, the potential is that the game boots in a second. There are no load screens. The game just fades down while loading a half dozen gigabytes and fades back up again. Same for a reload. You're immediately back in the action after you die. And
Dai, buoni
fast
caricamenti è una
travel
cosa
so fast
positiva.
it's blink and you miss it. As game creators, we go from trying to
Qualcosa che
distract
già avevano
the player
detto
from how
quando
long fast travel is taken, like those
l'esempio di
Spider-Man
Spider-Man.
subway
Quindi non è che
rides,
hanno
to
detto
being
nulla di
so
nuovo.
blindingly fast that we might even have to slow that transition down. Pretty cool, right? But for me, this is not the primary reason to change.
Guarda il sorrisino, per me prende per il culo tutto
The
il quello
primary
che cazzo.
reason for
Lo so,
ultra-fast
oh, veramente
SSD
bello,
is that it
però
gives
questa
the
non è
game
la cosa
designer
principale.
freedom. Or to put that differently, with a hard drive, the 20 seconds that it takes to load a gigabyte can sabotage the game that the developer is trying to create. I think almost all of us in the room have experienced this, maybe in different ways. Say we're making an adventure game and we have 2 rich environments where we each want enough textures and models to fill memory, which you can do as long as you have a long staircase or elevator ride or a windy corridor where you can ditch the old assets and then take 30 seconds or so to load the new assets.
Ah, il
Having a
caricamento tipo degli
30-second
open
elevator
world.
ride is a little extreme, More realistically, we'd probably chop the world into a number of smaller pieces and then do some calculations with sight lines and run speed.
Per il fatto tipo prima quando cambiavi mappa così usciva le cose più piccole, ci mettevano tanto a caricare.
There's a whole subset of level design dedicated to this sort of work, but still it's a giant distraction for a team that just wants to make their game. So when I talked about the dream of an SSD, part of the reason for that 5 gigabyte was to eliminate loads, but also part of the reason for that target was streaming. As in, what if the SSD is so fast that as the player is turning around, it's possible to load textures for everything behind the player in that split second? If you figure that it takes half a second to turn, that's 4 gigabytes of compressed data you can load. That sounds about right for next gen. Anyway, back to the hard drive. Another strategy for increasing effective read speed is to make big sequential chunks of data. For example, we might group all the data together for each city block. That removes most of the seeks, and the streaming gets faster. But there's a downside too, which is that frequently used data is included in many chunks and therefore is on the hard drive many, many times. Marvel's Spider-Man uses this strategy, and though it works very well for increasing the streaming speed, there's a massive duplication as a result. Some of the objects like mailboxes or news racks are on the hard drive 400 times. What I'm describing here are things that cramp a creative director's style. Either level design gets a little bit boring in places, or the data is duplicated so many times that it no longer fits on the Blu-ray disc. And you end up with hard limits on the player's run speed or driving speed. The player can't go faster than the load speed from the hard drive. And finally, I'm sure many of you have noticed that after a patch download, the PlayStation 4 will sometimes take a long time to install the patch. That's because when just part of a file has been changed, the new data can be downloaded pretty quickly. But before the game boots up, a brand new file has to be constructed that includes the changed portion. Otherwise, every change would add a seek or two. Even so, you can occasionally see this happening on game titles. They start to hitch once they get patched enough.
Mamma mia, se non annunciano come il modello mi incazzo.
So, no need to make brand new files with the changes incorporated into them, which means no
prendendo le stesse cose praticamente sui memorie, ma sono già le SSD.
There's yet one more benefit, which is that system memory can be used much more efficiently. On PlayStation 4, game data on the hard drive feels very distant and difficult to use. By the time you realize you need a piece of data, it's much too late to go out and load it. So system memory has to contain all of the data that could be used in the next 30 seconds or so of gameplay. That means a lot of the 8 gigabytes of system memory is idle. It's just waiting there to be potentially used. On PlayStation 5, though, the SSD is very close to being like more RAM. Typically, it's fast enough that when you realize you need a piece of data, you can just load it from
Minchia
the
però,
SSD and use it.
da 20
There's
secondi
no need to have lots of data
la RAM carica un secondo. Vabbè, sono quelli da 16 giga.
A different way of saying
La cosa più importante, no, non è tanto il gigabyte, ma non è più DDR6, non è più DDR5 ma DDR6, quindi la generazione avanti.
Sì,
The presence of the SSD
low latency.
2% più PC sono fermi alla DDR4, mentre schede video sono quelle appena uscite la DDR6, ma in RAM classica sono fermi alla DDR4.
No load screens. Design freedom, meaning no twisty passages.
Quindi carica velocemente, niente schermate di caricamento. Velocità ultra veloce su streaming.
The reality, though, is that the SSD is just one piece of the puzzle. There's a lot of places where bottlenecks can occur in between the SSD and the game code that uses the data. You can see this on PlayStation 4. If I use an SSD with 10 times the standard hard drive, I probably see only double the loading speed, if that. For PlayStation 5, our goal was not just that the SSD itself be 100 times faster. It was that game load 100 times faster. So every single potential bottleneck needed to be addressed. And there are a lot. Let's look at check-in and what happens when its overhead gets 100 times larger. Conceptually, check-in is a pretty simple process. Data is loaded into system memory from the hard drive or SSD. It's examined. A few values are tweaked to check it in, and then it's moved to its final location. At the SSD speeds we're talking about, that last part moving the data
Guarda com'è contento.
from one location to another takes roughly an entire next-gen CPU core. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. If all the overheads get 100 times larger,
prezzo
that
finale
will triple
3.000
the
euro.
frame rate as soon as the player moves, and a massive stream of data starts
Sono
coming.
curioso se mettono Zen
So to solve all that, we
RDNA
built
2
a
1.
lot of custom
That's
hardware,
not
namely a custom flash controller and a number of custom units in our main chip.
Cazzo, un flash
The
controller.
flash controller in the SSD was designed for
Controller non è il
smooth
pad,
and bottleneck-free operation, but also with games in mind. For example, there are 6 levels of
Dire che
priority when reading.
in questo caso vuol dire che è un tipo
Priority is
di
very important. You can
hanno
imagine the player
customizzato sotto il
heading into
loro
some new
controller
location in the
l'SSD
world
flash,
and
cioè nel senso
requesting
che hanno
a
preso
few
una
gigabytes of textures. And while
non
the
è
package
controller
is
nel
being
senso
loaded,
pad.
Sì, lo so, intendo
shot
buono sta
and
cosa,
has
che
to
lo
speak
customizzano
a few
loro.
dying words.
Beh,
Having
quello si
multiple
sa.
priority levels lets the
Ne
audio
prendono
from
le
those dying
potenze.
words get loaded immediately. On one side, that flash controller connects to the actual flash dies that supply the storage. To reach our bandwidth target of 5 gigabytes a second, we ended up with a 12-channel interface. 8 channels wouldn't be enough. The resulting bandwidth we've achieved is actually 5.5 gigabytes a second. With a 12-channel interface, the most natural size that emerges for an SSD is 825 gigabytes. The key question for us was, is that enough? I mean, it's tempting to add more, but flash certainly doesn't come cheap, and we have a responsibility to our gaming audience to be cost-effective with regards to what we put in the console. Ultimately, we resolved this question by looking at the play patterns of a broad range of gamers. We examined the specific games that they were playing over the course of a weekend or a week or a month, and whether that set of games would fit properly on the SSD. We were able to establish that the friction caused by reinstalls or re-downloads would be quite low, and so we locked in on that 825 gigabyte size, while also preparing multiple strategies so that those who want more storage can add it. I'll go through the details in a moment. Back to the flash controller. On the other side, it connects to our main custom chip via 4 lanes of Gen 4 PCIe. And inside the main custom chip is a pretty hefty unit dedicated to I/O. Before we talk about what that does,
Allora,
let's talk
è da
compression.
gennaio che no, dall'anno scorso che
PlayStation
sentiamo
4
due
used
rotture di
Zlib
coglioni
as its
sull'SSD.
format. We decided to use it again on PlayStation 5, but on my 2017 tour of developers, I learned about a new format called Kraken from Rad Game Tools. It's like Zlib's smarter cousin. Simple, similar types of algorithms, but about 10% better compression, which is pretty big. That means 10% more game on the USB disk or on the SSD. Kraken had only been out for a year, but it was already becoming a de facto industry standard. Half of the teams I talked to were
immagina alla fine tiene la borsa, la apre, tira fuori il
So we
PS5.
wrestled and built a custom decompressor into the I/O unit, one capable of handling over 5 gigabytes of Kraken format input data a second. After decompression, that typically becomes 8 or 9 gigabytes, but the unit itself is capable of outputting as much as 22 gigabytes a second.
Se quanto gli hanno pagate queste teste di COI, queste 4 teste di COI che stanno davanti a guardare?
That custom decompressor equates to 9 of our Zen 2 cores. That's what it would take to decompress the Kraken stream with a conventional
Ok, da questa cosa qua si deduce che non è come Xbox Series X, ma è sempre tipo PS4 design, nel senso che non è verso l'alto, ma è sempre verso l'alto.
Ah beh sì, quello sì. E mo vedi sarà quadrata ma tipo all'insù.
There's 2 dedicated I/O co-processors and a large RAM pool.
Sempre quadrata,
They're there principally to direct the variety of custom hardware around them. One of the coprocessors
Perché c'è la C del processore in alto a destra, la scheda video accanto al processore giù c'è il resto.
Sì, è quadrata insomma. Però adesso bisogna vedere se è alta, quadrata alta oppure quadrata schiacciata.
But a lot of developers map and remap memory.
Sarà tipo PS4 Pro.
And this too can become
con 5 piani.
There are coherency engines to assist the coprocessors.
PlayStation 6 sarà tipo la torre.
Fanno la torre, pian piano fanno la torre. Spero lui sia un ologramma perché dopo tutti sti mesi di attesa sarebbe il minimo. Ma ne. Ma ciao che ologramma. Sarà il nostro assistente personale di PS5. Quando compri PS5 ti danno anche lui incluso.
Vabbè.
Custom scrubbers in several dozen GPU caches to pinpoint evictions of just those addresses.
E negli angoli cosa mettete? Pezzi di merda. Non aggiungete cose?
Come non poter mettere la dissipazione?
Le ventoline dove li mettete? Spiegatelo.
Ma magari quella era una bozza fatta così.
Cheat.
And the whole process of loading it happens invisibly to you and at very high speed. Back to the dream.
Hai rotto il cazzo
Our
questo è
5.5
Ha capito.
really should translate into
Ma lui deve mettere il ditino nella piaga.
faster I/O than PS4 and allow the
Io sto facendo venire nervoso, te lo giuro.
super fast streaming
Sto
to become
filtrando.
a reality. Having said that, expandability of our SSD is going to be quite important. Flash
Da
is
ieri che
costly, and you
aspetto.
may very well want to
Cioè,
add
ieri.
storage to whatever we put in the console. Now, the kind of storage
Ancora?
depends on how you're going to use it. If you have an extensive PlayStation 4 library,
Giuro che se non mi tira fuori un trailer o
to play
qualcosa
those
di...
games on PlayStation 5, then a
Minchia.
large external hard
Madonna,
drive
tu non puoi
is
capire,
ideal.
io
You
compro
can
Xbox,
leave
tipo...
your games on the hard drive and play them directly from there, while
mi sa
saving
che
the
cosa
pricier
proprio sto-
SSD storage for your PlayStation 5 titles, or you can copy your active PlayStation 4 titles to
Dai che
the
arriva a
SSD.
100k di
If your
like.
purpose in adding more storage is to play PlayStation 5 titles, though, ideally you would add to your SSD storage. We will be supporting certain M2 SSDs.
Giuro metto
These
dislike
are
alla
internal
live, se mi fa
drives that you
incazzare.
can get on the open market and install in a bay in the PlayStation 5. As for which ones we support and when, I'll get to that in a moment. They connect through the custom I/O unit just like our SSD does, so they can take full advantage of the decompression, I/O coprocessors, and all the other features I was talking about. Here's the catch, though.
Ancora.
That commercial drive has to be at least as fast as ours. Games that rely on the speed of our SSD need to work flawlessly with any M2 drive. When I gave the Wired interview last year, I said that the PlayStation 5 SSD was faster than anything available on PC. At the time,
Interessa sapere anche se
virtual
metteranno un
M2
modello
drives
Pro di
used PCIe
PS5.
3.0, and 4 lanes of that cap out at 3.5 gigabytes a second. In other
Beh,
words,
tanto se uscirà
no
sicuro uscirà qualche anno
PCIe
dopo, ma
3.0
sicuro.
drive can hit the required spec.
Se ci stanno facendo sudare...
4.0 are now out in the market. We're getting samples and seeing 4 or 5 gigabytes a second from them. By year's end, I expect there will be drives that saturate 4.0 and support 7 gigabytes a second. Having said that, we are comparing apples and oranges, though, because that commercial M2 drive will have its own architecture, its own flash controller, and so on. For example, the NVMe specification lays out a priority scheme for requests that the M2 drives can
No,
meet.
Daniel,
And that scheme is pretty nice, but it only has 2 true priority levels. Our drives support 6.
bestemmie.
We can hook up a drive with only 2 priority levels.
Ho solo fatto
but
vedere
our
come metteranno i
custom I/O
pezzi, ma
unit has to
più di
arbitrate
questo.
the extra priorities rather than the
Neanche,
M2
hanno
drive's
detto che
flash
c'è
controller.
l'SSD
And so the
veloce,
M2
basta.
drive
E poi
has
sì,
a
hanno
little
detto che
extra
è tutto
speed to
flash
take care
sarà.
of issues
Caricare,
arising
niente
from
schermate di
flash.
caricamento, eccetera.
That
Solite
M2
cose sono già
drive also
sentite,
needs to
insomma.
physically fit inside of the bay we created in PlayStation 5 for M2 drives. Unlike internal hard drives, there's unfortunately no standard for the height of an
Dai,
M2
Bisogna
drive,
parlare del
and some
SSD.
M2 drives have giant heat sinks. In
Sputi in
fact,
faccia.
some of them even have their own fans. Right now, we're getting M2 drive
mi
samples
sotto
and
male all'occhio.
benchmarking them in various ways. When games hit beta as they get ready for the PlayStation 5 launch at year end, we'll also be doing some compatibility testing to make sure that the architecture of particular M2 drives isn't too foreign for the games to handle. Once we've done that compatibility testing, we should be able to start letting you know which drives will physically fit and which drive samples have benchmarked appropriately high in our testing. It would be great if that happened by launch, but it's likely to be a bit past it. So please hold off on getting that M2 drive until you hear from us. Okay, back to our principles. Balancing evolution and revolution is the second of them. This was definitely a recurring theme with the GPU. We need new GPU features and capabilities. If we only have more performance, it's not really a new generation of console. Of course, many of these capabilities result in more performance. That's part of why a PlayStation 5 teraflop is more powerful than a PlayStation 4 teraflop. But we aren't just looking for the performance. We also need the ability to do something with the GPU that could not have been done before. and we need higher performance per watt. Every time we double the performance of some GPU component, we don't want to find out we've doubled the power consumed and the heat produced.
L'evoluzione?
But at the same time, we have to make sure the GPU can run PS4 games, and we have to ensure that the architecture is easy for the developers to adopt. Now, backwards compatibility was handled masterfully by AMD. They treated it as
Vabbè,
a
se si mette a tradurre
design.
tutto, cazzo sono.
As
Capisco
a
che capisco
solution to
l'inglese,
adding
ma
new
non fino a sti
features without
livelli.
blindsiding developers, we made sure that if there were new significant features, it would be optional to use them.
Quando c'è qualcosa di interessante lo
ray
dico.
tracing, but you don't have to use ray tracing to make your game. The GPU supports primitive shaders, but you can release your first game on PlayStation 5 without making any use of them. Before I get into the capabilities of the GPU, I'd like to make clear 2 points that can be quite confusing. First, we have a custom AMD GPU.
RDNA 2. Questo è bellissimo.
Cos'è? GPU?
AMD is continuously improving and revising their tech.
Architettura RDNA 2.
Their goals were, roughly speaking, to reduce power consumption by re-architecting the GPU to put data close to where it's needed, to optimize the GPU for performance, and to add a new, more advanced feature set. But that feature set is malleable, which is to say that we have our own needs for PlayStation, and that can factor into what the AMD roadmap becomes. So collaboration is born. If we bring concepts to AMD that are felt to be widely useful, then they can be adopted into RDNA 2 and used broadly, including in PC GPUs. If the ideas are
contento.
specific to
Non
what
messo la
you're trying
GPU.
to accomplish, like the GPU cache scrubbers I was talking about, then they end up
Mo li facciamo pagare PS5 3.000 euro.
If you see a similar discrete GPU available as a PC card at roughly the same time as we release our console, that means our collaboration with AMD succeeded in producing technology useful in both worlds. It doesn't mean that we as Sony simply incorporated the PC part into our console. This continuous improvement in AMD technology means it's dangerous to rely on teraflops as an absolute indicator of performance, and CU count should be avoided as well. In the case of CPUs, we all understand this. The
Perché
PlayStation
non
4
sapesse,
and PlayStation 5
quello
each
uguale
have
col trattino è significa
we never
diverso.
think that meant the capabilities
Per chi non
of
conosce la
the phones were
matematica.
equal.
Capito, Cetina?
It's the same for CUs. For one thing, they've been getting much larger over time. Adding new features means adding lots of transistors. In fact, the transistor count for a PlayStation 5 CU is 62% larger than the transistor count for a PlayStation 4 CU. Second, the PlayStation 5 GPU is backwards compatible with PlayStation 4. What does that mean? One way you can achieve backwards compatibility is to put the previous console set in the new console, like we did with some PlayStation 4. But that's, of course, extremely expensive. A better way is to incorporate any differences in the previous console's logic into the new console's custom chips, meaning that even as the technology evolves, the logic and feature set that PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 4 Pro titles rely on is still available in backwards compatibility modes. One advantage of this strategy is that once backwards compatibility is in the console, it's in. It's not as if a cost down will remove
la compatibilità, no? Che sono tutte uguali.
On PlayStation 3. Achieving this unification functionality took years of efforts by AMD, as any roadmap advancement creates a potential divergence in logic. Running PS4 and PS4 titles at boosted frequencies has also added complexity. The boost is truly massive this time around, and some game code just can't handle it. Testing has to be done on a title-by-title basis. Results are excellent, though. We recently took a look at the top 100 PlayStation 4 titles as ranked by Playtime, and we're expecting
questi sono compatibili, nel senso hanno la stessa base ma modificata in modo nativo, nel senso hanno coeresa, hanno potenziato, quindi rendono anche retrocompatibili.
But at the same time, not to require use of the new
come fa Xbox principalmente,
for more than a decade, GPUs have imposed a restriction on game engines.
Non è che faceva prima che prendeva e cambiava tutto a caso, hanno preso la stessa base e l'hanno buttata a me. Nel senso non è che uguale, nel senso proprio
that means
prestazioni molto più
do
rapide.
even basic optimizations, such as aborting processing of a vertex if all geometry that uses it is off-screen. PlayStation 5 has a new unit called the Geometry Engine, which brings handling of triangles and other primitives under full programmatic control.
Cervellino
As a
unico.
game developer, you're free to ignore its existence and use the PlayStation 5 GPU as if it were no more capable than the PS4 GPU, or you can use this new intelligence in various ways. Simple usage could be performance optimization, such as removing back-faced or off-screen vertices and triangles. More complex usage involves something called primitive shaders, which allow the game to synthesize geometry on the fly as it's being rendered.
Niente, in poche parole, PS5 potrà alzarsi e portarti la colazione
PlayStation 5 will allow for a broad variety of
al suo
techniques,
cervello.
including smoothly varying level of detail, addition of procedural
però voglio
detail to
vedere la
close-up
forma
objects,
io
and
come sarà.
improvements to particle effects and other visual special effects. Another major new feature of our custom
Ray tracing.
RDNA 2-based GPU is ray tracing, using the same strategy as AMD's upcoming PC GPUs.
Beh, ray tracing
The
l'avevano già
series
detto, no, che
contains
ci
a new
fosse.
specialized unit called the intersection engine, which can calculate the intersection of rays with boxes and triangles. To use the intersection engine, first you build what is called an acceleration structure. It's data in RAM that contains all of your geometry. There's a specific set of formats you can use. They're variations on the same BVH concept. Then, in your shader program, you use a new instruction that asks the intersection engine to check a ray against the BVH. While the intersection engine is processing the requested ray triangle or ray box intersections, the shaders are free to do other work. Having said that, the ray tracing instruction is pretty memory intensive, so it's a good mix with logic-heavy code. There's of course no need to use ray tracing. PS4 graphics engines will run just fine on PlayStation 5, but it presents an opportunity for those interested. I'm thinking it'll take less than 1 million rays a second to have a big impact on audio. That should be enough for audio occlusion and some reverb calculations. With a bit more of the GPU invested in ray tracing, it should be possible to do some very nice global illumination. Having said that, adding ray-traced shadows and reflections to a traditional graphics engine could easily take hundreds of millions of rays a second, and full ray tracing could take billions. How far can we go? I'm starting to get quite bullish. I've already seen a PlayStation 5 title that's successfully using ray tracing-based reflections in complex animated scenes with only modest costs. Another set of issues for the GPU involved size and frequency. How big do we make the GPU, and what frequency do we run it at? This is a balancing act. The chip has a cost, and there's a cost for whatever we use to supply that chip with power and to cool it. In general, I like running the GPU at higher frequency. Let me show you why. Here's two possible configurations for a GPU roughly of the level of the PlayStation 4 Pro. This is a thought experiment. Don't take these configurations too seriously. If you just calculate teraflops, you get the same number. But actually, the performance is noticeably different because
questo qua Play 4 Pro che è 4.6 teraflops, serve la potenza di calcolo, non so come spiegarlo.
There are a lot of other units. And those other units all run faster when the GPU frequency is higher.
Ma voglio vedere il PS5 io.
33% higher frequency, rasterization goes 33% faster. Processing the command buffer goes that much faster. The L2 and other caches have that much higher
veloce, tutto più veloce, però.
About the only downside is that system memory is 33% further away in terms of cycles. But the large number of benefits more than counterbalance that. As a friend of mine says, a rising tide lifts all boats. Also, it's easier to fully use 36 CUs in parallel than it is to fully use 48 CUs. When triangles are small, it's much harder to fill all those CUs with useful work. So there's a lot to be said for faster, assuming you can handle the resulting power and heat issues, which frankly, we haven't always done the best job at. Part of the reason for that is, historically, our process for setting CPU and GPU frequencies has relied on some heavy-duty guesswork with regards to how much electrical power games will consume and how much heat will be produced as a result inside of the console. Power consumption varies a lot from game to game. When I play God of War on my PS4 Pro, I know the power consumption is high just by the fan noise. But power isn't simply about engine quality. It's about the minutiae.
Poi a me sinceramente non me ne frega un cavolo di quanto consuma. Tanto le bollette sempre si devono pagare.
Typically consumes less power than processing simple geometry.
Se consuma di più o meno.
I suspect why Horizon's map screen with its low triangle count, makes my PS4 Pro heat
Beh,
up.
il consumo è una cosa direttamente
Our
proporzionale
process on
comunque
previous
al
consoles has
sistema
been
di
to try to guess
raffreddamento,
what the
così.
maximum
Quindi
power
magari stanno
consumption
introducendo.
during the entire console lifetime might be, which is to say, the worst case scene in the worst case game, and prepare a cooling solution that we think will be
Infatti i
quiet
cooling
at that power.
stanno parlando di quella roba là adesso.
If we get it right, fan noise is minimal. If we get it wrong, the console will be quite loud for the higher power games, and there's even a chance
Ma
that
del
it will
rumore?
overheat and shut down if we misestimate
Il
power.
sistema di raffreddamento.
PlayStation 5 is especially challenging
Fanno
because the
azzeccato
CPU
giusto.
supports 256
Vabbè, giustamente.
native instructions that consume a lot of
Se
power.
mettono qualcosa di
These are great
raffreddamento che fa
here and there,
schifo.
but presumably only minimal.
Infatti hanno detto che il loro problema di
Are they?
prezzo, che
If we
sicuramente era
punish
per il
the
sistema
major
di raffreddamento.
256-bit instruction usage, we need to set the CPU clock substantially lower or noticeably increase the size of the power supply and fan. So, after much discussion, we decided to go with a very different direction on PlayStation 5. We built a GPU with 36 CUs. Mind you, RDNA2 CUs are large. Each has
L'RDNA2
more
CU è quella nuova, no?
CUs we were using on PlayStation 4. So, if we compare transistor counts, 36 RDNA2 CUs equates to roughly 58 PlayStation 4 CUs. It is a fairly sizable GPU. Then we went with a variable frequency strategy for PlayStation 5, which is to say we continuously run the GPU and CPU in boost mode. We supply a generous amount of electrical power and then increase the frequency of GPU and CPU until they reach the capabilities of the system's cooling solution. It's a completely different paradigm. Rather than running at constant frequency and letting power vary based on the workload, we run at essentially constant power and let the frequency vary based on the workload. We then tackled the engineering challenge of a cost-effective and high-performance cooling solution designed for that specific power level. In some ways, it becomes a simpler problem because there are no more unknowns. There's no need to guess what power consumption the worst-case game might have. As for the details of the cooling solution, we're saving them for our teardown. I think you'll be quite happy with what the engineering team came up with. So, how fast can we run the GPU and CPU with this
Tu
strategy?
come te l'aspetti la
The
forma?
simplest approach would be to look at the actual temperature of
Tu
the
come te
silicon
l'aspetti
die
la
and
forma?
throttle the frequency on that basis. But that won't work.
Secondo
it
me
fails to
fanno un
create a
qualcosa di
consistent PlayStation
strano.
5 experience. It wouldn't do
Secondo me
to run
somiglierà un
the
po' al
console
dev
slower
kit,
simply
insomma,
because
che-
it was in a hot room. So rather than look at the actual temperature of the silicon die, we look at the activities that the GPU and CPU are performing and set the frequencies on that basis, which makes everything deterministic and repeatable.
Perché ho sensazione
While we're
che
at it, we also use AMD's smart
inizi
shift
ad entrare
technology
più nel
and send
mondo
any
estetica
unused
PC,
power
una
from
roba
the
del
CPU
genere.
to the GPU
Cosa?
so it can squeeze out a few more.
Secondo me l'estetica si avvicinerà più al
Benefits
mondo
of this
PC.
strategy are
Dici?
quite large. Running a GPU at
Secondo me è qualcosa di simile
unreachable target
alla
with the old
PS4,
fixed
però più
frequency
futuristica, tipo con i
strategy. With this new
LED.
paradigm, we're able to run
Con
way
la-
over
essere.
that. In fact, we
con la
have to
lucina.
cap the GPU frequency at 2.23 GHz.
Tipo
Sì, la
qualcosa.
lucina c'è già, magari tipo...
No, la lucina
con
però
le LED.
continua, bella più tipo LED, no?
36 CUs at 2.23
Proprio si vede bella potente.
10.3 teraflops.
No,
And we
10.3
expect the
tera
GPU to
solo.
spend most of its time
Eh?
at or close to that
Solo
frequency
10
and
tera.
performance. Similarly, running the CPU
che
at 3
delusione.
GHz was causing headaches with the old strategy. But now we can run it as high as 3.5
No, quello è prima, mi sa.
In fact, it spends most of
No,
its
la
time.
Play 4 ne ha 4.6, comunque più del doppio della Play
That doesn't
4.
mean
Però,
all
però-
games will be running at 2.23 gigahertz and 3.5 gigahertz. When that worst case game arrives,
mezzo
it will
delusione.
run at a lower clock speed, but not too much lower. To reduce power by 10%, it only takes a couple of percent reduction in frequency, so I'd expect any downclocking to be pretty minor. All things considered, the change to a variable frequency approach
Oh,
will
quanti
show
soldi sta guadagnando sto
significant
tipo.
gains for PlayStation gamers. The final of our 3 principles was about
Io
finding
spero,
new
queste
dreams.
qua è una
It's
delusione.
important for us on the hardware team to find
così.
new ways to expand or deepen gaming, and that's what led us to a focus on 3D audio.
Confronto Xbox che ne ha più di 12.
As players, we experience the game through the visuals, through audio, and through the feedback we receive from the controller, such as rumble or haptics. Personally, I feel a game is just dead without audio. Visuals are, of
Secondo
course,
me
important, but
devono
the
prima
impact
far
of
vedere la
audio is
forma,
huge as well.
il modello.
At the same time, the audio team on a game project has to
poi
do a lot
il
with a
resto.
little. For example, on PlayStation 4,
Per me
there's
ora sta
fierce
mettendo tipo
competition for
hype.
Jaguar.
Capito?
Audio typically ends up getting just a fraction of a core. That's not much of a computational resource, particularly when you consider that the visuals run at 30 or 60 frames a second, but audio processing needs to happen at almost 200 times a second. So, it's been tough going making forward progress on audio with PlayStation 4, particularly when PlayStation 3 was such a beast when it came to audio. The SPUs in Cell were almost
Immagino già qualcosa tipo di touch sul joystick.
pipelined algorithms could
Un
really
menu
take
sul
advantage of
joystick,
asynchronous
tipo roba del
DNA
genere.
and frequently reached 100% utilization
Sarebbe
of the
male.
floating point unit. There's unfortunately
Però il problema è che
nothing
dopo costerebbero un
comparable on
fottio di joystick.
Probably the most dramatic progress in the PlayStation 4 generation has been with virtual reality. The PSVR hardware has its own audio unit. It supports about 50 pretty decent 3D sound sources. And this provided a hint as to where we could go with audio, as well as some valuable experience. Not to oversimplify, but here were our goals for audio on PlayStation 4. The first goal was great audio for everyone, not just VR.
VR è normale, portano avanti la tecnologia di adesso,
That
VR.
audio had to be part of the console. It couldn't be a peripheral. The second goal was to support hundreds of sound sources. We didn't want developers to have to pick and
Sarebbe
choose
figo
what
se
sounds would get
il
3D
VR
effects and which wouldn't. We
sarebbe
wanted
anche lui
every sound
compatibile
in the
con
game to
PS5.
have dimensionality.
Il primo
And
modello
finally,
intendo.
we wanted to really take on
è
the challenges
compatibile.
of presence
Ah, è
and
compatibile?
locality.
Sì,
Now,
l'hanno già
when we say
annunciato.
presence,
Ah,
we
sì,
mean
l'avevo
the
capito.
feeling that you're
Vabbè, allora a
actually
posto, ci
there.
sta.
You've entered the matrix. It's not, of course, something we thought we could perfectly achieve.
soprattutto che
The
dobbiamo prendere il
idea was
VR.
that if we stopped using just a rain sound and instead used lots of 3D audio sources for raindrops hitting the ground at all sorts of
Perché
locations
tutti
around
schede
you,
Z
then
anche
at
là?
some point your brain would
Ah,
take
vi
an
state
inch and begin
addormentando.
to have this feeling.
Ma
Of real presence inside the virtual world of the game.
sicuro. O se non fa uscire una bomba. Niente. Daniele, praticamente niente, solo fatto dalla velocità più potenziata, cose scontate, insomma. La compatibilità.
Hanno confermato l'RDNA2 che è un'ottima cosa, perché hanno detto l'RDNA non si sapeva se era l'1 o il 2, che sia il fatto che sia il 2 è buono, però ha solo 10 teraflops, 10.3, che sono un po' pochini, no, allora non è che sono pochi, sono tanti, più del doppio della Play 4, però confronto Xbox che ne ha più di 12. Vabbè che già PS4 Pro Xbox One X aveva 2 teraflops di differenza. Quindi teraflops di
But with
differenza
3D audio with good locality, the idea is you know the enemy is precisely there.
Che non avrà tempo di caricamento, hanno detto che non ci sarà
How do we know where a sound
schermata
is
di
coming
caricamento
from?
perché caricherà istantaneo.
Well, all those bumps
Quelle
and
robe là,
folds
insomma,
knew
cose che
what
si
happened
sapevano.
anyway, evolutionarily speaking. Based on what direction the sound is
Ovviamente
coming
hanno
from,
precisato un
sound
po'
waves
di
bounce
più,
around inside the ear,
qualche
there's constructive
precisazione
and destructive interference,
più
and the result is a
dettagliata,
change in
ecco,
volume.
però.
The phase of the sound also shifts, depending on what path the sound wave took to reach the ear canal. These volume
Però se non mi
changes
dice
and phase shifts are different
come
for each
sarà il
direction
design,
and
lo
also
sputo in
vary
faccia.
depending on the frequency of the sound. Head size and head shape also impact the sound in a similar fashion. The way that the sound changes based on direction and frequency can be encoded
Anche
in
il
a table
volume.
called the
Ma
head
che
related
caspita me ne
transfer,
frega a me del
or
volume.
HRTF. Here's part of one. The
Madonna.
vertical axis is the frequency.
Lo migliorano
The
ci
horizontal
sta,
axis is
però
the
comunque...
direction, front,
Ma
back,
ok,
left,
vabbè,
right,
migliorate
and the color
l'audio,
gives
ma
the
beh, è una
degree
cosa
of
scontata
attenuation of the
migliorare
sound
l'audio, non puoi lasciare tutto uguale.
The HRTF is as unique to
Però che
an
me ne frega che
individual
migliorano
as
la
a
qualità
fingerprint.
audio.
In fact,
Che
here
già
with me,
di
mine
suo è buono, non è che...
Here's how we measure an HRTF. We've taken hundreds of people through this process. We put a microphone in the
Beh, che
subject's
ti danno
left
l'audio
and right
sopra
ear
in
canal,
3D è una cosa molto...
and then sit the subject down in the middle of an array of 22 speakers. We then play an audio sweep from each speaker as we rotate.
Secondo me
the
anche questo
subject.
tipo verrà
In the
pagato un
course of
fottio
10
per stare
or
fermo
20
così.
minutes, we're able to sample the HRTF at over 1,000
Metti la tua testa, tieni.
Using an
Milione di
HRTF for
dollari.
rendering audio creates unparalleled quality, but it's computationally expensive. The simplest way to use an HRTF is to process a sound source to make it appear as if it's coming from one of those
le cose più o meno importanti si sapevano.
Unfortunately, the processing has to be done in frequency.
Sì, stanno approfondendo e basta.
So there's multiple fast Fourier transforms needed for
Che la
every
qualità
sound
abbiamo
source, for
capito
every
che sarà
That's
molto più alta rispetto alla Pro.
This computational complexity was the determining factor for our strategy. It meant we had
capito, è
to bite the bullet
scontato.
and design and build a custom hardware unit
Allora,
for 3D audio.
Play 4 l'uscita
Referring to the hardware unit
era
and the proprietary algorithms
era a livello medio-basso.
3D.
Poi 3 anni dopo la 4 uscì con la Play 4 Pro, e la Play 4 Pro era medio-alta di potenza, ma di 3 anni fa. Nel senso, con la Play 5 adesso è lo stesso hardware medio-alto. Quindi è come se fosse la differenza è come se avessero fatto uscire la Play 4 Pro al posto di 3 anni fa, 6 anni fa. Capito? Non so se hai capito cosa intendo.
Sì, hanno fatto uno scatto di qualità.
Esatto.
Il
rapporto qualità che era uscito dalla Play 4 alla Play 5 è un rapporto qualità molto alto.
All data access is via DMA, just like
Ma fin qua hai capito cose che...
Our target was that it would have more power than a CPU.
Stanno dicendo cose che comunque è un po' interessante, ma ti lascia un po' la mano in bocca. Nel senso che cazzo vuoi sapere le cose più...
capito, ma
Per me è un altro modo per mettere ancora più hype su Play 5.
Mamma mia, ma...
Where we ended up
troppo hype dopo lo
troppo
video.
esagerato.
As all 8 Jaguar cores.
Poi stanno mettendo l'hype su sta oretta, poi alla fine mostrano
If we were to
tutto,
use the same algorithms as PSVR, that's enough for
Lo
something like
spero.
5,000 sound sources. But of course, we want to use more complex algorithms, and we don't need anything like
I
that.
45 minuti che parla di fila.
It would have been wonderful if a simpler strategy, such as using Dolby Atmos peripherals, could have achieved our goals.
Intanto
But we wanted
sorride fiero,
3D audio for
però.
all, not just those with licensed soundbars or the like. Also, we wanted many.
Non so se sta ridendo per dire
not
cazzo,
just the
aspettate
32
alla fine che bomba lancio, presentazione.
Finally, we
Stronzi,
wanted to be
sto
able to
fottendo
throw
nel senso.
Ma ne?
processing power problem, and it wasn't clear what
Lo metto tutti nel
peripheral might
buco alla
have
fine.
inside of it. In fact, with the Tempest engine, we've even got enough power that we can allocate some to the games, to the extent that games want to make use of convolution reverb and other
Sono uno
algorithms
stronzo.
that are either
Mi hanno pagato $1
computationally
milione
expensive
di dollari
or
per
need
venire qua,
processing.
dare
But
qualche
the
dettaglio e
primary
andarmene.
purpose of the Tempest engine
Non è.
is 3D audio. Now, 3D audio is a major academic research topic. It's safe to say that no one in the world has all of the answers. And the set of algorithms that has to be invented, tuned, or implemented to realize our vision for 3D audio is immense. For example, use of HRTFs in games is quite complex. Before, I talked about making a sound source appear as if it's coming from one of those 1,000 HRTF sample locations. But for high-quality 3D game audio, we have to handle other possibilities. The sound source might not be at one of the 1,000 HRTF sample locations, so we have to blend the HRTF data from the closest locations that we have sampled. The sound source might be moving, which needs very special handling as that blend keeps changing, and that can cause phase artifacts in the resulting audio. Or the sound source might have a size to it, meaning it should feel as if it's coming from an area rather than a single point. There's also whole categories of approaches to be handled. 3D audio can be implemented using individual processing of 3D sound sources. But alternatively, ambisonics can be used for 3D audio. Ambisonics being somewhat like the spherical harmonics used in computer graphics.
Ambisonics.
And finally, there's audio devices. The player might be using headphones or TV speakers or have a higher-end surround sound setup with 6 or more speakers, all of which need different approaches.
Per me
That's a lot of variations. It's nice to have the computational resources of the Tempest engine, but it's clear that achieving our
Vi
ultimate
daremo un
goals
chip
with
da
3D
installare
audio
nel
is going to be
cervello
a
in cui potete
multi-year,
collegare la
step-by-step
PS4.
process.
Beh,
Having said that,
Cioè,
headphone
PS5,
audio
scusa.
implementation is largely complete. It was a natural place for us to start. With headphones, we control exactly what each ear hears, and therefore the algorithmic development and implementation are more straightforward. For TV speakers and stereo speakers, we're in the process of implementing virtual surround
Insomma,
sound.
cose
The
d'audio.
idea being that if
Cazzo
you're
me ne
sitting
fotta me
in front of
dell'audio.
the TV, then the sound
Aia,
can be made to
sto
feel
provando.
as if it's coming from any direction, even behind you. Virtual surround sound has a lot in common with 3D audio on headphones, but it's more complex because the left ear can hear the right speaker and vice versa. We have a basic implementation of virtual surround sound up and running. We're now looking at increasing the size of that sweet spot, which is to say, making the area you need to be in to feel the 3D effect larger, and we're also working to boost the sense of locality. Headphone audio is the current gold standard for 3D audio on PlayStation 5, but we're going to see what we can do to bring virtual surround sound to a similar level,
Presentazione che se adesso vado a prendere una
we'll start in
mela,
on setups with more speakers, such as 6-channel surround sound.
se vado a prendere una
It's now
mela,
to the point where some of the
annuncialo
PlayStation
subito.
5 games in development
Modelli.
are extensively using these systems. One of the game demos allows you to toggle between conventional PlayStation 4 style stereo audio and our new 3D audio. I listened with just an ordinary pair of over-the-ear headphones, and wow, I could feel a difference. 3D audio has that dimensional feel to it. Conventional stereo audio feels smashed flat by comparison. The improvement is obvious. So, a big advancement, but have I entered the
Non è che
matrix?
faccia
Does my
fiera.
brain believe I'm
Ho
really
studiato 600 anni per stare
talking
qua
about
a pigliare i
earlier when
soldi.
I explained our target?
Vedi quello che c'è in mano la Play 5?
Well, the answer is
Ti
no,
immagini?
but you've probably caught on to what's missing here,
Il
namely
pad di
whose
PS5.
HRTF was being used. It wasn't mine, it was the default HRTF. The audio team analyzed the hundreds that they measured and chose the one they felt was the closest fit to the total game-playing audience. This shows a piece of the default HRTF on the left and my HRTF on the right. You can see that the general features are much the same, but the details are quite different. With the default HRTF, as I said,
vado a prendere
3D
il
audio
cuscino e
sounds
metto
pretty great.
a dormire
When I
fino
use my HRTF, though, the audio reaches a higher level
Tra
of
6 minuti e
realism,
un'ora che
which is to
parlo.
say that when using headphones and my HRTF,
tra 10
I
minuti.
occasionally
Tra
get
8
fooled
minuti.
and
tra
even
7.
think a sound is coming from the
c'ho
real
il
world
telefono
when it's
del
actually
mutore.
coming from the game. A corollary to this is that there are a few people whose HRTFs are sufficiently far from the default HRTF, that's the red dot here, that they can toggle between PS4 style and PS5 style audio and not sense much difference. I've had a few people describe the PlayStation 5's 3D audio as sounding like
Quanto può durare la
a bit better
conferenza?
stereo audio. Presumably they're the ones at the very edges of this diagram. Which means what HRTF you're using is key. I'd like everyone to be able to experience what I'm experiencing, but obviously it's not possible to measure the HRTF of every PlayStation user. That means HRTF selection and synthesis are going to be big topics going forward as the Tempest technology matures.
Disconnessi più di 40.000 persone dalla live.
HRTFs. There's a simple test where you pick the one that gives
Stanno
you the best
addormentando tutti.
locality. That's just the first step, though. This is an open-ended research topic. Maybe you'll be sending us a photo of your ear, and we'll choose a neural network to pick the closest HRTF in our library. Maybe you'll be sending us a video of your
Me lo vedo dopo in un video.
and we'll make a 3D model of them and synthesize the HRTF. Maybe you'll play an
parlare di
audio
video, però io ho
to
parlato solo
tune
di
your HRTF. We'll be subtly changing it as you play
Cosa?
and home in on the HRTF that gives you the highest score, meaning that it matches you the best. This is a journey we'll all be taking together over the next few years. Ultimately, we're committing to enabling everyone to
Giuro lo vado a
experience
trovare in
that
casa
next
se
level
non
of
annuncia
realism.
niente.
Hopefully, I've been able to illustrate a bit about our design and
Design
process today, and why PlayStation 5 has the feature set that it does. Now comes the fun part. We get to see how the development community takes advantage of that feature set. I'm hoping for the completely unexpected. Will it come from audio, ray tracing, the capabilities of the SSD, or something else? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Thank you for your time today.
No.
Basta. Io a sto stronzo lo picchio, io lo riempio di botte.
Ah, non posso.
Io lo riempio di botte. 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 53 minuti della mia vita buttati. 53 minuti della mia vita buttati. Sto pezzo di merda. Sto pezzo di merda.
Dai, che merda.
Ma è un pezzo di merda. Vediamo Gabbo che ha detto. Ma è un pezzo di merda. Oh, Gabbo è in live su Twitch. È vero che è in live su Twitch lui forse. Dai, ma un pezzo di merda, è un pezzo di merda. Ok, ciao, ok, ciao, ok, ciao e se ne va. Ok, ciao e se ne va.
Grazie. Grazie per il vostro tempo.
Mettere dislike, per favore.
Hi. Unfortunately, we had to cancel the
Dislike,
talk
vaffanculo.
planned for GDC.
But
we do have some
Dai,
super
ma
exciting news
troppo
about
hype,
PS5.
troppo.
And who better to bring that to you than the one and only Mark Cerny. Without further ado, over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Jim.
Mark Cerny, questo si chiama Mark Cerny.
There will be
Sto qua, sto pezzo di merda.
to look at the PlayStation 5 games. Today I want to talk a bit about our goals for the PlayStation 5 hardware.
Ciapà, va, ciapà. Per favore. Vedere Twitch. Vediamo cosa ha detto Gabbo. Sono curioso. Sì, però dai. Stronzo proprio. Gabbo. È in live o non è ancora in live? Non è più in live? Non è più in live. Dai però, la gente non fanno i seri. Non fanno i seri. Niente, anche Rampage è appena andato offline. Ciao, ho visto tutto e hanno già detto che non si sarebbe vista la console. Come hanno detto che non si sarebbe vista? Io ho sentito che si sarebbe vista. Ah, poi mi senti tu?
Sì.
Ok. Dai però, come hanno detto che non si sarebbe vista? Che noia, che noia. C'è scritto anche nella descrizione che c'era solo una descrizione delle caratteristiche tecniche. Sì, ma che senso ha allungare così tanto? PS5 Real System
io non ho mai sentito.
Mark Cerny provides a deep dive in the
Non ho mai sentito YouTube che me l'avevano annunciato.
Cosa? Audience, vogliamo vedere la PS5. Mark, non vedrete la PS5. L'audience dislike. Minchia veramente. Guarda i dislike come sono aumentati. Guarda i dislike. Sono aumentati un fottio i dislike.
Insomma, pure nell'anche solendo io un po' così, si stanno lamentando tutti,
Sony. Ragazzi, volete vedere PS5 tutti? Sì. Marco, PS cosa? Dai, guarda tutti che si lamentano. Guarda, sono morto, ho buttato via tipo 56 minuti della mia vita. Io ho messo like perché hanno detto ciò che mi interessava. Sì, ma dai, ma sono sempre le stesse cose alla fine, capisco tutto, però hanno aumentato cioè hanno messo i dettagli, però che palle. Dai, ma perché non annuncio? Siamo a marzo, c'è un'epidemia mondiale, ci sta distruggendo. Questi qua stanno ancora pensando al modello estetico. Dai, caso. Dai, che tristezza. Metto like per compassione. Non ho capito i teraflops. Oddio, i teraflops up erano 10.3?
Sì.
Erano 10.3 i teraflops. Poco più bassi, cioè di 2 più bassi se non sbaglio di Xbox.
2.3, Xbox era 12.3, no, 2 più bassi.
12.3 Xbox, quella nuova e...
No, Xbox quella nuova 12, poi qualcosa.
Xbox quella nuova... 12. 12.3. PS...
Quella da 4.6 teraflops praticamente è la PS4 Pro. Quella da 10.3 è la PS5.
Ecco. quello 4.6 era PS4 Pro e 10.3 PS5.
Tutti stanno dicendo, mi sa che vado passo su Xbox.
Tutti che si stanno, sto vedendo, tutti si stanno lamentando.
Sì.
Mannaggia Mark, chi è? Mark Cerny, Mark Cerny. Lo vado a trovare, chi è questo Mark Cerny? Adesso vado a vedere su Instagram Mark Cerny. Mark Cerny. Sto pezzo di merda. Mark Cerny. Non ha Instagram, è pezzo di merda, paura, Sto piece of shit. Dai, però Rosic c'è, si rosica qua, Design. Dai, guarda, tutti si stanno lamentando. Tutti. Nessuno. La chat, tutti che dormono. Pezzi di PS Hit. PS Shit. Ma ne? PS Shit. Play Shit. Dai, che rosic però. Andiamo un bel GG PlayStation. Commentiamo GG PlayStation. Dai però. Che rosic. Niente ragazzi, allora a sto punto ci becchiamo domani in live con i Bull True di Doom Eternal. Quindi mi raccomando ragazzi, lasciate la campanellina, iscrivetevi, così domani vi arriva subito la notifica, perché non so l'ora, che ora mi arriva. Sicuro domani in anteprima mi arriva. Anteprima mondiale sicuro lo iniziamo domani. Per il resto lasciate un like, sono veramente depresso. Fatemi sapere la vostra. E noi ci becchiamo a un prossimo video live. Giusto Appo? Appo è morto. Bella raga, suoni.
Ciao, ragazzi, bello.